Welcome back to the channel. We're here to break down this week's UFC card, UFC Fight Night, Amir Albazi versus Tatsuro Taira. And I hope you're all having a great day. I hope you're all doing well. Let's get into the first fight of the night. Well, these are all in random order, but first fight we're breaking down, it's going to be Nick Klein versus Andrey Pulayev. My pick for this fight is going to be Nick Klein. I think Nick Klein's going to get it done. I think he's a good fighter, and he's coming off of his UFC debut, which he lost to Mansour Abdul Malik, and I thought he looked pretty good in that fight. You know, in the first round, he wobbled Mansour and with a spinning back fist, and then he put the pressure on. But then in the second round, he got overwhelmed and he got finished. But for the most part, I think he looked good. He came forward, he put some pressure on, and in this matchup, I think it favors him. You know, in his MMA career, Nick Klein has won a decision before. He has a third round submission win as well. So his cardio isn't something that I'm worried about, especially in this matchup where Andrey Pulyev isn't going to be putting the pressure or pushing the pace on him. And someone like Andrey Pulyev, he's also coming off of his UFC debut, which he lost as well. But he lost to Christian Leroy Duncan, which also isn't a bad loss. But Christian Leroy Duncan, before that fight, he got manhandled by Gregory Rodriguez, which is a good fighter to be fair. But when Andrey Pulyev fought Christian Leroy Duncan, Pulyev didn't look good in my opinion, and he barely threw any shots, didn't have an answer for Leroy striking. He just got picked apart. So Leroy was the one pretty much dominating that fight all three rounds. And Andrey Pulyev hasn't fought or beaten anyone in his career that really stands out. I can definitely see him being one of these guys that go 0-4 or 1-3 in the UFC and then get cut. So just based off of their UFC debuts and their last performances alone, you can see Nick Klein is coming into this matchup with the more dangerous upside, and he's the more dangerous striker. And if anyone's getting a finish, it'll definitely be Nick Klein. He's a dangerous guy with his strikes and his submissions on the ground, and I can definitely see him getting a finish here. So give me Nick Klein. I just like his striking, and he's dangerous, and he wobbled Mansour Malik with a spinning back fist, has cardio, he has submission wins. And yeah, just based off of Andrei Pulyev's last performance, he looked pretty flat versus Christian Leroy Duncan, and he doesn't have any standout wins, and he does have low output as well. So I'm picking Nick Klein, sharper, more dangerous everywhere, likely to get a finish in this matchup. Next fight on the night, we're going to be breaking down Rinya Nakamura versus Nathan Fletcher. My pick for this fight is going to be Rinya Nakamura in this matchup. You know, Nathan Fletcher, I think he's going to come into this fight trying to take Rinya down and control him. I don't think he's going to use striking to try to put Rinya on his back foot or pressure him with boxing or anything like that. So if it's just two wrestlers trying to implement the game plan, I see Rinya having more success because I just think he's the more dominant and proven wrestler with the proven skill set in the UFC. Plus, his stand-up game is also really high level as well for Rinya. So he was finishing everybody in his on his way to the UFC in the road to UFC tournament. He had knockouts and he had submissions. Then goes on and fights his first three fights in the UFC, wins them all. He wins every UFC fight in dominant fashion, his first three, and then he faced some random ass dude, Moon Gafarov, who was just 1-2 in the UFC, and he gave Rinya his first loss in his career, which caught many people by surprise because he got where Gafarov suddenly turned into Prime Adesanya that night, and he had elite kickboxing and he had Canelo boxing all throughout that fight. And on top of that, Rinya didn't attempt any takedowns. It was definitely a weird fight that caught everyone off guard. Maybe Rinya just underestimated the striking ability of Gafarov, and he just ate shots all night long. And he was like a deer in the headlights and wasn't going for takedowns like he usually does. He kept trying to strike with him, even though he was getting worked in the stand up. So we know Nathan Fletcher's game plan. He has 7 subs on his record and only has 1 knockout. He's gonna be coming in trying to look for the takedown, and he's not gonna have that prime Adesanya striking or that Canelo boxing. Nathan is going to try and take him down, and I don't think that game plan is going to work against someone like Rinya. Rinya wants you to try and grapple because he has dominant wrestling. Again, last fight he didn't use it, just decided to eat shots all night, but I don't think you have to worry about Nathan Fletcher outstriking you or outstriking Rinya, right? Like Rinya has some pretty decent striking. I actually rate Rinya's striking pretty highly. He has good timing, he has powerful shots, and obviously not based off of that last fight, but I think against Nathan Fletcher, we can see a more well-rounded game from Rinya. I see Rinya stuffing takedown attempts, landing the more devastating shots, outstriking Nathan, and even landing his own takedowns if he wants. So on top of that, Rinya, he has a thick base, and it won't be easy to take him down. I just think it's going to be a dominant win from Rinya because of his high level wrestling, his dangerous striking. He has finishes, and I just think his last fight was an off night. We're not going to base his whole career, what he's done, based off of that one fight. I think we're going to see a new, improved version of him. And fighting someone like Fletcher, who's a grappler with 7 subs, I just don't think it's going to be as well rounded as Rinya coming into this fight. So I just think Rinya has the better wrestling, heavier hands, and I think he dominates this fight. I said Rinya about like 30 times in this breakdown, but moving on. We're going to break down Rodolfo Vieira versus Tresean Gore. I'm picking Rodolfo Vieira to win this fight. You know, I wasn't ever really a fan of Tresean Gore. He's a big power puncher, with slick submissions, but I just think he's too predictable. He has some nice submissions that can catch you off guard, but the way he fights, it's like you know what he wants. He's trying to land that big power punch on you, which is fun and exciting, but when it comes to higher level competition, that isn't going to work. And the two guys that Tresean did beat in the UFC with his submissions, they're not impressive victories at all, right? And in his last fight, he got completely out kickboxed by a great fighter in Marco Tulio, where he attempted no takedowns at all. Tresean also got knocked out by Cody Brundage in the first round and also lost to Brian Battle. But if he would have beat Cody Brundage, then I'd view him a bit differently. But he lost, and Cody likes to brawl, and he isn't so technical, so you can't really be losing to someone like that if you're trying to climb the rankings or move up the division. On the other hand, you have Rodolfo Vieira, who has only lost to Anthony Hernandez, Chris Curtis by split decision, decision, and Andrey Petrosky. And that Petrosky fight, it was pretty competitive. You know, Rodolfo landed some nice shots. He was active with his strikes, especially in the later rounds, maintaining the center of the octagon, putting the pressure. And the guys that Rodolfo has beaten in the UFC, they're pretty notable names. You know, Armin Petrosian, Cody Brundage, who Tresean lost to, and also beat Dustin Stolfus as well. So these are overall good wins. I think Rodolfo can avoid the big shots in the first round, take him into the later rounds, potentially take him down and submitting him, or at least press him up against the fence if he has to. And when it comes to the striking, I think someone like Rodolfo is high enough level to avoid big power punches, duck under, shoot for a takedown, and I even think he can hang with him in the feet as well. So on top of that, Rodolfo, he has a chin on him and he's very durable. So even if Tresean does land a big shot, I think Rodolfo can maintain his composure, still stick to the game plan, come forward. And I just think Rodolfo is going to be the better, more well rounded, the tougher fighter. So yeah, because he's so durable and well rounded, he already beat people like Cody Brundage and Petrosky. I think he's going to have a win over someone who has big power, but he's too predictable and he hasn't fought the best competition. He hasn't beaten the best competition, right? So I think Rodolfo's gonna avoid the early bombs, win with grappling, or win with in the later rounds with his striking. So moving on to the next fight, we're going to be breaking down Ketlen Souza versus Piera Rodriguez. So I'm gonna keep it real. I'm not too familiar with both fighters, but from what I've seen from Piera Rodriguez and Ketlen Souza, I think Piera Rodriguez should win this fight because of the stylistic matchup. She likes to be patient with her strikes. She picks opponents apart from a distance, and she's actually willing to go for takedowns when they present themselves. And Ketlen Souza, she's susceptible to getting hit throughout all her fights, right? So I think this fight would be mostly on the feet, mostly be a striking battle, but Ketlen does have unpredictable, explosive striking. She's a strong boxer with good power, but I can see Piera Rodriguez being the cleaner, more technical fighter, staying on the outside and picking her apart. I got Piera to win this fight by decision. Plus, Ketlen Souza just lost to a 40-year-old Angela Hill in the big 2025, and that's not a good look at all, right? And yeah, that fight was competitive, and you can say that she got robbed in that fight. She got robbed of her win, but you can't be in a close fight with Angela Hill these days. Facing someone who's younger and hungrier, that's gonna be a bad night for Ketlen, especially if she shows up the same way she did in her last fight. So Ketlen Souza, she does have explosive striking, but I think she's hittable, and she lost a close fight to Angela Hill. So on the other hand, you have Piera Rodriguez, just a cleaner striker. She's patient. She mixes in takedowns. So I'm going with Piera Rodriguez because she has the technical edge, and I think she'll outpoint Ketlen Souza on the feet. So moving on to the next fight, we have a banger matchup. Spoiler alert: Kevin Vallejos is going to absolutely destroy Danny Silva. I've been watching Kevin since his fight on the Contender Series, and he has been looking so good in every fight he's in. This kid is 100% the future of the division. He's 23 years old. He's 23 years old. 23 years old right now, and he has so much power in his hands. Not only the knockout ability in his power, but he's so clean with his strikes. This guy has Topuria level boxing. He's mixing in shots to the body, overwhelming opponents with so many different strikes at once, and he's just a hard person to figure out and deal with. And that one loss that he has on his professional MMA record is to Gene Silva, which he lost to him on the Contender Series when he was only 21 years old, and he landed some really nice shots in that fight. It's not like he got dominated. He showed a ton of durability in the later rounds, going a distance with Gene Silva. And Kevin Vallejos, just coming off of his UFC debut in his last fight, he won by knockout, of course, against a not so great fighter. And I think he can win by knockout here. And in his post fight speech in his UFC debut, he won, he knocked the guy out, and he said, Gene Silva, I'm coming for you. And now they're giving him a new opponent with a last name named Silva. I just think Danny Silva is cooked just because there's that Silva edge to his last name. I think there's extra motivation for Kevin Vallejos in this matchup. He doesn't want to lose to another Silva. And speaking of Danny, he's 2-0 in the UFC right now, but not really the most convincing wins. Both wins have been by split decision. And if you're not dominating your fights coming into a matchup like this, you're gonna get ran over, I think. And I just think Kevin, he's going to land big, powerful shots here early and often. I can see another first round knockout for Kevin, maybe a second round. And the thing about Kevin is like when he fights, you tune in because the way he moves, the way he manages his distance, the way he strikes, it's art. It's beautiful to watch. He's only 23 years old. He has elite boxing, some serious power, and I really think he's the future of this division. Where you have Danny Silva coming off of split, two wins, split decision wins, and he's not dominating his fights as much as Kevin Vallejos is. So I just think Kevin Vallejos is too sharp. He's too powerful, and I can see him getting a knockout in this matchup for sure. Moving on to the next fight, we're going to be talking about Elvis Brener versus Esteban Ribovics. I'm going to go Esteban Ribovics for this fight. So, before the UFC, Esteban Ribovics, he never went the distance in any of his fights, and he was getting highlight reel knockouts and submissions left and right. But as he came into the UFC, we saw that he's able to go the distance and still look good towards the final bell, right? He's super durable, never been finished in any of his fights, only losing by decisions, and now coming off of a split decision loss. I think he's hungry for a win. Even if he doesn't get the finish here, I can't see Elvis Brener winning a decision here. And he's definitely not going to be the first person to finish Esteban Ribovic, right? So in the UFC, Brener, he's he's lost to really good fighters. You know, he's coming off of a knockout loss to Joel Alvarez, who's an absolute beast, and Miktabek Orabai, who's another beast, and he has some previous losses on his record that don't look good, and his wins in the UFC, they're not that impressive, right? So I see Esteban Ribovic closer to the caliber of people like Joel Alvarez and Miktabek Orabai. I would say he's more in that group than the group of guys that Brener is beating, right? So, and I've always been a fan of Esteban. I like the way he fights. I like the way he strikes. He throws hard kicks, very good kickboxing. He sets up shots really nicely. He has good feints and comes forward, puts pressure on you. I think he's going to land the more convincing shots here, and I'm pretty confident he wins this fight. It could be a dog fight, but I think Esteban has more dog in him than Elvis Brener does. And it's a tough place to be if you're Elvis Brener, coming off of back-to-back losses to two absolute warriors. You're going, and now you're being fed to another savage like Esteban Ribovic. So this is the UFC. If you can't hang, you're gonna get eaten by the wolves. And I can see Elvis Brener in this matchup. I think he's going to be going for some takedowns. But Esteban has good takedown defense, and Elvis Brener, he's going to have to weather a heavy storm to have any chance of success here. And I just don't think he can weather that storm, right? Esteban is going to be landing heavy shots often in this fight, and if he doesn't get him out of there by the end of the fight, Esteban would have landed enough heavy shots to win him a decision. So on top of that, you have Esteban Ribovic, who's actually very durable, great kickboxing, relentless pressure, and Elvis Brener coming off of two back-to-back losses to very elite competition. I just think Esteban Ribovic is gonna land the heavier shots and win a decision here, or even have a late finish. So I'm picking Esteban Ribovic for this fight. Next up on the card, we're going to predict and break down Rafael Estevan versus Felipe Buns. I know it's Bunez, but I think he's Buns because he's not a Buns. He's not Buns fighter. I'm picking Rafael Estevan, but in this matchup, I think he's gonna look Buns. So I'm taking the Hispanic Khabib, the guy who's undefeated, the guy who has jiu-jitsu tatted on his chest. Rafael is coming into this fight with the youth and height advantage, a ton of momentum, has been looking dominant in the UFC. He's 2-0 already, and he fought earlier this year, and he actually looked really good as well. So he's going to be a big favorite against Felipe, and Felipe has a handful of losses already on his record that don't look too good. He's 1-1 in the UFC. However, that one loss was to Joshua Van, who's next up in line for a title, but his win was to Jose Johnson by armbar. Jose Johnson isn't the most impressive victory. He just got cut by the UFC this year. And the armbar was nice, right? But you're not going to submit Rafael Estevan by armbar when he's the dominant grappler and he has jiu-jitsu tatted on his chest. So I just think there's no way that happens. I don't see Felipe submitting Rafael, but I imagine this fight will hit the ground. Felipe Buns does have 9 submission wins on his record and only 2 knockout wins, but Rafael, he has a more well-rounded skill set. He has 4 knockouts, 3 subs, 6 decisions, and Rafael is really good. On the feet, he'll be better than Felipe, and I think his ground game will definitely be better than Felipe. And he's just been looking really dominant in the UFC. It's hard not to take him here. He goes for takedown after takedown, and he never settles, for getting his takedown stuffed or defended. You can defend it, and he's right back on it. And he has very high fight IQ to go along with his skills. And Felipe Buns gets taken down by fighters who don't even grapple. We saw Joshua Van taking this guy down, and Joshua Van's a striker. So I just think this is Rafael Esteban all day. I'm calling him the Hispanic Habib. He just has relentless takedowns, and he's undefeated. And I don't think Felipe Buns is going to be the one to take that undefeated record from him. You know, Felipe, he's dangerous. He has good striking. It's decent, and he has good submission wins on his record, but he has weak takedown defense, and he's submitting guys that aren't impressive to submit. It's like I'm picking Rafael Estevan. I think he's gonna dominate the grappling and possibly get a finish here as well. So next fight on the card, we're gonna be breaking down Mateus Rebecki versus Chris Duncan. So this is one of those fights where I saw the odds before I started breaking down the fight, and I usually don't do that, and they kind of blew me away. My pick is going to be Chris Duncan for this fight. Seeing Chris Duncan at a plus 155 underdog, it did catch me by surprise. And I guess I can understand why. Mateus, he's a great fighter. He's a very smart fighter, but I think Chris Duncan is pretty good. He's going to be 5 inches taller than Mateus in this matchup. He just destroyed Jordan Vucenic. He caught Balagioki and a slick submission, even though he's getting outstriked in that fight. And I just don't think he's a bad fighter. You go back and watch his fight on the Contender Series versus Charlie Campbell, you'll see he is never out of a fight, and that fight is one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of Chris Duncan. So, and yeah, of course, Mateus Rebecki, he's a solid fighter as well, but I think the odds should have been closer here. If anything, it could have been a pick 'em in my opinion. And I never say that. I always try to side with someone completely. And I just think the odds are the way they are because Mateus is going to be putting a lot of pressure on Chris Duncan with his strikes. He's going to be shooting takedowns over and over and has relentless cardio. But I can see Chris Duncan staying at range, winning the striking exchanges. And I can see him stuffing takedowns, going for his own takedowns, and throwing up nice submissions, reversing positions if he does get taken down. So I'm gonna go with Chris because I'm already such a big fan of his, and I think he'll be landing the more convincing shots here in the eyes of the judges. And I think he just has a more dangerous upside to him with his submissions and his striking as well. I think it's coming along pretty nicely, and this is a big step up in competition for him. But I think Chris Duncan is finally coming into his own, getting better. We're seeing improvements in his game all the time, and it should be a great fight, but I'm leaning Chris, and it's just more of a gut feeling than a pick that's me picking with my head. I'm going more with my heart. But I can see him winning a decision here or a submission. Rebecca, he's gonna be relentless with his pressure. He's gonna have a ton of cardio. He has a strong ground game, but I believe in Chris Duncan. I believe that he's a dangerous striker. He has great comeback potential. And even though it's a big step up here, I can see him getting the upset. I just think he has a bit of sharpness to him. I think he's well aware of what he's doing in there, and he can reverse positions, and I think he edges out a close decision here. So my pick is gonna be Chris Duncan. Next fight on the card, we're breaking down Neil Magny versus Zaleski dos Santos. So it's no secret that Neil Magny isn't the same fighter that he used to be. He's a shell of himself right now, I would say, and I don't think we're ever gonna see Neil Magny look good in a UFC fight anymore. He's 37, and he's 1-3 in his last four Granted, he's fighting the absolute best of the best that the division has to offer. He lost to Carlos Prates, Michael Morales, Ian Gary. He got lucky by beating Mike Mallet after losing the first 2.5 rounds. So this just shows that he obviously can't hang with anyone at the top of the division or anyone on their way up. So I'm picking Dos Santos to win this fight. He's fighting a fellow elder in Zaleski Dos Santos who's 38. Even older than he is. But I feel as though Dos Santos still shows signs of athleticism, shows signs of eagerness to fight, and to be fair, he hasn't been fighting the high level competition that Neil has. Still, though, I think Dos Santos is going to come forward, put some discomforting pressure on Neil with his boxing. He's going to close the distance, back Neil up against the fence, and I think that pressure is going to be too much to handle for Neil. And I can see Neil trying to go for takedowns or gain some kind of control against the fence, but Dos Santos being 4 inches shorter, it's gonna be hard for Neil to do that. It's much harder trying to take down someone that's much shorter than you and is closer to the ground than you are. Their defense is gonna be much better than if you were taking down someone your own height. They can get in on their hips easier, and it's gonna be hard for Neil Magny to really get down on Zaleski Dos Santos's hips if he does try to go for a takedown. So I can see Neil struggling to control Dos Santos in the clinch or in the wrestling, and that means Neil is going to have to get some respect from Dos Santos in the striking, and I don't think Neil holds any power to scare Dos Santos away. So there is a part of me that can see this fight being a staring contest and the taller man landing punches from the outside. Neil Magny is gonna be what 4 inches taller, right? So the taller man, landing punches from the outside and winning on the scorecards, but just by putting out a bit more activity and volume by staying on the outside. But I'm banking on Dos Santos to come forward and be a step ahead of Neil striking, and I just think Neil Magny, he's aging right now. He's slower and he struggles versus pressure, and I think Dos Santos is still pretty athletic. He has aggressive boxing. He's going to come forward. So I'm picking him to put the pressure on, land the cleaner shots, and win this fight, probably by a decision. Next fight on the card, we're breaking down Caro Rosa versus Nora Cornolle. I'm going to pick Nora Cornolle to win this fight. She has violent striking, and I just think her striking looks pretty good. And the way she fights, she's always looking for the finish, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. She's coming in for the finish. She has grit, she has power, and she loves to fight. And she's fighting someone who doesn't have the same level of power, but Kara Rosa, she does have some cardio and she has a ton of experience, which could help her out in this matchup. But I just think Nora, she's going to put a ton of pressure on Kara coming forward, and I think that's the way she wins this fight, with pressure coming forward and backing up Carol Rosa against the fence. Even though Carol does have experience and she's a cardio machine, I just think the grit and the violence coming from the striking of Nora, the constant pressure, the fight finishing intent, I think that's going to be enough for her to look good in the judges' eyes and win a decision. So I think she's going to put an aggressive pace and land big shots on Carol. But it could be a very close fight, right? But I just think the more convincing shots are going to be coming from Nora. So that's why I'm going to pick her to win this fight. Next fight on the card, we are at the main event of the evening, which is going to be Amir Albazi versus Tatsuro Taira. I'm picking Tatsuro Taira. How can we not pick Tatsuro Taira in this matchup? He just went to war with Brener Royval. His grappling looked very dominant in that fight. He lost by split decision. Excuse me. And when you watch that fight back, Tatsuro Taira showed a ton of heart and showed that he's a dog, right? Someone who's really trying to get the win despite any adversity he has to face. And before that fight, he was dominating literally everyone in the UFC. So I don't see Amir Albazi giving Taira a ton of striking pressure like Brener Royval did. Taira, he's gonna be the younger, much younger fighter. He's gonna be the taller fighter. He's gonna have a longer reach. And I think his striking will look better than Amir's and more improved than what we saw in his last fight. So, in a fight where both fighters want to have control in the grappling over one another, I see the guy who has better striking being able to get their grappling going by using their striking to initiate the takedowns or get in the clinch. And I think Amir Albazi, he hasn't really been the same fighter ever since he's had his surgeries and his injuries. He just got dominated by Brandon Moreno for 5 rounds, where he looked like he was okay with not adapting to the fight. Where Taira showed that he actually tries to switch things up when the fight isn't going in his favor. So his loss to Brandon Royval wasn't a bad loss at all. You know, he went toe to toe with Brandon Royval for the most part, had a ton of control time on the ground, and he showed very high level grappling. And he's still super young with so much potential to grow as a fighter. And I think he could be the future of this division. And someone like Amir Albazi isn't going to get in the way of that. You know, Amir might land some shots, but I think the grappling difference will be very obvious. And Amir isn't going to throw some big overhand right to knock him out, or he isn't going to throw some nasty combos on him. Taira should be able to win this fight on the feet and on the ground for sure. And Amir can go for takedowns if he wants, but that's exactly what Taira wants, you know? Like he wants this fight on the ground. So I can see Taira switching positions or reversing, taking his back, and this should be Taira all day. I can see Taira winning a decision here because Amir Abbasi hasn't been finished. But I just think Tatsuro Taira, he's too young right now. He's too sharp. His grappling just looks elite right now. You know, he gave Brendan Royval a total war. So fighting someone who's like Amir Albazi, just I feel like after his injury, after his surgery, he's just on a decline right now. He struggles in his fights and he's struggling to adapt mid fight when things aren't going his way. So I just think Tatsuro Taira, he's gonna be better everywhere in the striking, in the grappling, and I just think he's the future of this division. So my pick is gonna be Tatsuro Taira, and those are my picks for this week's UFC fight card. Let me know what you thought. Let me know who you're rolling with. Drop your predictions in the comments and let me know if you agree and or disagree, and I'd love to see what y'all thought. So as always, I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a great day. That's it for me. I'm out. Peace.